Coming up on today's show, Let's Talk Bitcoin comes to you as recorded live from Friday, May 17th in the hours before the conference kickoff. Today's release kicks off our Bitcoin 2013 San Jose extravaganza with new shows and lots of interviews being released every weekday. This episode's find the host sitting down for the first time ever in the same room with extensive discussion of the new ideas and innovative approaches proposed and suggested at the GigaOM meetup, which took place on Thursday the 16th at the San Jose Tech Museum. Stay tuned for my interview with Eric Voorhees, the man who gave himself to Bitcoin, and a really nice guy. That'll be out tomorrow, May 22nd, with more to follow. There are big things in store for Let's Talk Bitcoin, so enjoy the show. Hi, and welcome to a special episode of Let's Talk Bitcoin. Today we're reporting to you from from Stephanie's hotel room, actually, at the Marriott at the Bitcoin Conference 2013 in San Jose, California.
Woohoo! We're all in the same room. This is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Never happened before.
As usual, I am joined by Stephanie Murphy.
Hello.
And Andreas M. Antonopoulos.
Hello.
And we just met for the first time about... I guess it was last night that actually we met for the
yesterday.
First time. Yeah, yesterday. This is the first time we've been in a room pretty much without more people outnumbering us than the three of us. This is an incredible experience, and you know, I feel incredibly blessed to be able to be here for this. This is like, you know, I mean, the metaphor that keeps getting used is this is the internet, you know, in 92 or 89, depending on who you want to talk to.
Yep.
But, you know, I mean, that is totally what's happening. Last night, we attended the GigaOM community meetup, basically, and about half the people there were planning on going to the conference today. And my God, it was packed. It was
standing room only for 400 people easily. They really knew how to throw a party, too. It was very professional. Met a lot of really interesting people there, and they had a series of talks set up for us. We heard from Mike Cern, Google engineer. That was really interesting to hear his thoughts on Bitcoin.
I didn't know that he was. I didn't know he was Google engineer. I've been watching Mike Cern post for quite some time now, you know, and kind of saying, okay, well, some of that stuff is good, some of that stuff is bad, but I had no idea he was affiliated with Google. That's very interesting.
Yeah, this is his 20% project.
Interesting.
And you know, it kind of shows the level of innovation you can get if you let people just focus on things they're excited about. And Mike's really excited about Bitcoin, and it shows. That's another thing we got from all of the speakers yesterday, I think, was palpable excitement from the speakers and the audience, and just this flow of incredible ground-shaking ideas, history-making ideas. I heard things I'd never thought about, never heard of about Bitcoin. I think I've said this before, my mind has been blown for 9 months. Well, it's accelerating. Bennett from Buttercoin talking about unique and innovative uses of Bitcoin and automated payment systems, such as, for example, Google self-driving cars paying tiny fees to overtake other cars on the freeway, essentially making an HOV lane that is cost-based. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's a good idea, but it's a really weird and interesting idea.
And it's something that's possible because you have the ability to transact at these incredibly small values. When I heard that idea, I was thinking, okay, so this is like taking the toll road and sort of superimposing this like social payment system where there's a value exchange between people who want to go fast versus people who want to go slow. And so, you know, maybe you just don't care. Suddenly driving in your car is being subsidized by the people who do care a lot. I mean, that's an incredible idea that's really that's only possible with something like this.
Yeah, well, people don't think about the fact that today's HOV lanes are really indirect. So the people who can afford to use the HOV lanes for whatever reasons, or some of the permit-based lanes that exist in other states, essentially that money goes back into a big highway fund, and who knows if it ever ends up improving the road. But in this environment, it's exactly that. You know, the people who are driving slower would literally perhaps not pay gas for that particular trip because it's being subsidized. And that was just one of, say, 20 groundbreaking history-making ideas that I heard yesterday at the conference. Another one was Mike Hearn talking about Bitcoin enabling autonomous agents to have their own bank accounts and operate as autonomous agents. Essentially, we're talking about artificial intelligence or autonomous agents that are used to do decision-making on the internet that have their own bank account and use micropayments to advance a specific goal. And then if you take that idea a bit further, you have the possibility of processes competing in an eco niche online. And if a process is not successful in raising funds in its wallet, it can't afford its hosting, so it goes offline. And that's really an incredible idea once you grasp the implications it has. So, just every 2 minutes, mind blown again.
Yeah.
And this is happening again and again in Bitcoin, but it's happening in slow motion on the forums.
Right.
And it just got condensed in a couple of hours yesterday, and I can't wait for tomorrow, the conference.
Yeah. So many button-up shirts, so many pairs of glasses. My God, it was the nerdiest room I've ever seen, and I've been covering games journalism since 2005. It was a very diverse crowd. One of the other things that was really exciting was there were a lot of people at the meetup who were new to Bitcoin, who had not really, who were not necessarily attending the conference, were there to learn about it. I spoke with one gentleman from Japan who was incredibly excited and wanted to know what Bitcoin was and the free money was, and I think he must have stumbled into the meetup or something like that, and was just so caught up in it. The other thing, of course, was people wanting to get involved with the project. There was that engineer who stood up.
Oh, he asked a question. Yeah, I'm a doer, not a donator. What can I do to contribute? And got an answer from this whole panel.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Doers are very much needed in this environment. So I have one little complaint, but it was a bit balanced. And the one complaint I had is that, like many early environments in technology, the room was a sausage fest. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. Women
were that too.
underrepresented. But on the other hand, hearing this constant refrain of "this is the internet in 1992," well, it was absolutely diverse by comparison, because when I was on the internet in 1992 and it was, 250,000 academics, there wasn't a woman in sight in my computer science department, I can tell you that, or anywhere near on it. So
there might have been someone pretending to be a woman.
Possibly, yes, in fact, many of them, but it's a much more diverse environment. I hope it gets better. But in a way, it's already better than some of the other technology domains.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I noticed that too, because, I'm a woman in the Bitcoin community, and I sometimes notice that, when I go into a room.
I can vouch that she's not pretending to be a woman.
Oh my, have you seen something that I haven't shown you?
Everybody just hears your voice. Who knows nowadays, right? With all that software.
Well, I was looking for you guys last night because we had never met each other, just seen pictures of each other online since we started working on this project. And I couldn't find you. I mean, there's a sea of men, and Adam and I were emailing each other during the presentations, and I said, it might be a little easier for you to pick me out of the crowd. Why don't you just look for the person with the purple skirt?
Yeah. Well, I was looking around for wavy hair. We had identified 3 or 4 possible candidates.
But on the other hand, if you look at the crowd yesterday, what surprised me was, okay, the gender diversity wasn't great quite yet, but the ethnic diversity was tremendous.
Yeah. Tremendous.
And that is a real point that people need to realize. Bitcoin is not the developed nation's currency. It's going to succeed in America last.
Right.
It's going to succeed everywhere else where they don't have a world reserve currency that is somewhat stable or maintains the illusion of being stable. And that was represented in the crowd. I think the first 3 or 4 questions were all from people from the Indian subcontinent who are interested in applying it. And they had some very interesting and provocative questions about how you apply microtransactions. And here's the funny thing. When we talk about microtransactions, we're talking about dollars. When they're talking about microtransaction, they're talking about rupees, i.e., tenths of a penny.
Right.
And that's a very different perspective. And you could see the panel freeze because they didn't have an answer for how you make an efficient transaction in less than 100 rupees.
He was fairly combative too. He was really, he asked 3 or 4 follow-up questions afterwards and really pressed him on the answers.
They had to clarify, what is 200 rupees worth? And he said, about
they lack the perspective of the developed world, and that's where Bitcoin succeeds first. Because if it's hard to do a dollar transaction with a debit card, it's impossible to do a rupee transaction with a credit card, right? Yeah. So they have much more relative utility or marginal utility for the currency in microtransactions. So when people decide to set a certain fee level, they should not be thinking in dollars. They should try and figure out what the cost of a cup of coffee is in the slums of Bangalore, and then figure out what kind of microtransaction that is.
One of the other really common nationalities that we saw there was the Argentina. Argentinians.
There was a panel at one point where there were 2 people who were CEOs of major companies.
It was the finance panel,
that were from Argentina, and they were talking about what it's like to buy property there. Right. You have to go and meet with notary, I think, and then
yes, for the escort service as we do in the U.S., but with a suitcase of money.
Yeah, with a suitcase of cash,
and the fees are incredible for that. I mean, just a huge amount of fees. And so there was one person, I can't remember.
Wences Caceres.
Yes, he was saying his friend wanted to buy an apartment in Argentina,
Buenos Aires, for about $1.5 million. Because, by the way, just because the currency is in the hole doesn't mean that the apartments are not bloody expensive.
That's right. And they, in Argentina too, they have currency controls right now, I think. And there's the actual market exchange rate for their currency is different than the official exchange rate. So that complicates things even further.
And nobody keeps their money in the country, because if you keep it in the country, the government steals it from you.
Yeah, exactly. And so how wonderful would Bitcoin be in a situation like that? And Wences Caceres was saying that his friend wanted to buy an apartment and asked him to do something where he would hold the escrow. What did he exactly ask the friend?
He wanted to front him the Argentinian money versus essentially an IOU in dollars back in their American bank accounts. Because, in these situations, both seller and buyer both have their money outside the country, usually in a bank account in the US. So essentially all they need to do is create the necessary IOUs temporarily in Argentinian money. Or Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. He said he wanted nothing to do with that transaction, but if it were done in Bitcoin, it would probably be so much easier and the fees would be less. So it would cost everybody who was involved way less money.
Yeah, and I love the conclusion of that story where he said, and in the end of that, I had this image of the actual transaction that went through, which was two over 50-year-olds, completely tech unsavvy people exchanging QR codes in a room with a notary. Yeah. And this actually happened in Argentina. Argentina is a perfect example of where Bitcoin gets adopted first, because people in Argentina have been suffering a financial and currency crisis in slow motion for 20 years. And a lot of countries are like that. We tend to assume that currencies operate like they do in Western nations, and we're the small, temporary exception. The vast world knows what a black market is because they have to use it on a daily basis.
What about the concept of being able to attach your ID to a wallet, like voluntarily, that Mike Hearn was talking about building on top of the existing Bitcoin infrastructure? That was really interesting to me.
Yeah.
He was really careful, I thought, to stress if you want to, so that basically the pseudonymous nature of Bitcoin could still be used to anyone's advantage who wants to, but there could be more infrastructure or software that interfaces with the Bitcoin network where you could potentially identify yourself if you want to.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the verifiable nature of Bitcoin is what the important part is. It's about ownership, and so if you can guarantee that you own it, then it doesn't really matter if it's anonymous or using your real name. The point is that it's accurate. Is that you just have to make that association functionally. So yeah, I mean, since we started talking about the Bitcoin ID project that Joe Cascio was working on, there have been several other projects that are basically in this same vein that have sort of started popping up. So clearly this is an idea that's getting traction, and clearly it's something where, we were talking with a potential sponsor of the show and who's a DNS guy, and my God, he was like, it was blowing his mind. He was like, wow, we need to attach this to emails because it would functionally eliminate the spam problem by making it so, if somebody doesn't have any sort of reputation associated with that particular address that they're claiming as their identity, then, I'll just never see the email. And if someone wants to get it to me, they can, send 0.01 Bitcoins to me, and I'll be able to tell that it's not spam, because even that, small amount of relative value is still much more than someone's going to send out with spam.
But what we're seeing at the moment is essentially the reflection of the fact that a lot of the things we take for granted in traditional currencies are several different principles mashed together through necessity or constraints in the underlying currency. What do I mean by that? In most security systems, you have trust, you have attestation, the ability to prove you own something, and then you have identity. And we don't think of these as separate things because usually, in order to make it practical, all three are mashed together. You know who I am, you know what I own, and therefore you can trust me. And you can't know that you can trust me without knowing who I am. You can't know that I own something without knowing who I am. So we've by necessity brought these three together. The analogy I like to think of is, as the internet broke apart those concepts, before, if you were a publisher, you were someone who had access to information, you were someone who had access to writers, and then you were someone who had a megaphone or printing press and bought ink by the barrel to express that opinion, and you could not separate the concept of journalist from access to the printing press, access to the halls of power, and a rational voice. Now you can. Anyone has a printing press. So we've actually separated those, and now we can focus on what really matters, which is a rational voice and a smart idea. Right. And you can get the other things for free. Well, with currencies, we've mashed together trust, identity, and attestation. We don't need to. With Bitcoin, you can prove you own something without telling anyone who you are. And so gradually we're pulling apart these concepts, and we're able to focus on how we make the most efficient transaction on each one of these. If you want to prove just trust and build reputation, you can do it without identity. If you want to show your identity without showing any of your bank details, you can do that. So this is really opening up and revealing things that were put together for no reason other than the constraints.
If I showed you a website where you could easily purchase electronics from the world's largest distributor with Bitcoins at 0% markup, would you think it was too good to be true? Good news, it's real, and it's at bitcoinstore.com. Choose from 500,000 items, save money over Amazon and Newegg, and convert your Bitcoins to real-world items. You can even buy with privacy. All they need is a shipping address. But don't take my word for it. See for yourself at bitcoinstore.com.
One of the other themes that's been coming up kind of on both sides of the issue is that location matters.
Yes.
And so on the one hand, you've got this huge movement from, essentially the third world or places where they have unstable currencies. And on the other hand, you have this impending threat of regulatory death functionally coming from the United States. We spoke about this on episode 8, but, Eric Voorhees, in my interview with him this morning, functionally said, it is a bad idea to do anything with Bitcoin that is a business in the United States, and that he thinks fundamentally they're going to fail. He's moved his companies now to Panama. Yeah.
I was talking with him last night too. That was really interesting to hear.
Absolutely.
He said it's just so much easier in every way. From a business standpoint, there are no taxes except if he does business within Panama, and that's pretty minuscule.
Right.
I think the real issue here is you can't do a small business in the U.S. with Bitcoin. You can do a big business in the U.S. with Bitcoin because you're a big business, you can buy due process. If you're not a big business, you can't buy due process. You can't comply with the regulations, and you will be stopped. Now, the rest of the world doesn't really care. Regulatory compliance is a first world problem, and I say that as #first world problem as it's mocked on various sites. It's the kind of problem you only worry about if no one's shooting at you.
Right.
And quite honestly, in most of the world, regulation is a matter of whether and how much you can bribe different officials to regulate you or to be compliant. And all of this checking boxes and filling forms is alien because there is no process like that. Right. So it's not a problem. You can be much more loosey-goosey with your transactions, and that works perfectly fine because nuance and gray areas are how the economies work. Here we have all of this black and white. We try to believe that it's actually rule of law when, of course, obviously it's an illusion. And it's a trap. It's a terrible trap. Unless you can bring the big guns to the courtroom to fight for your due process, regulation is just a way of killing small business.
Yeah, I actually have to say I was really disappointed with the amount of people who were on the panel last night who seemed to be cheering for regulation, saying it's not only inevitable, but it's good and it'll be great.
Well, of course it is. For them, because they represent the big business that can afford to make regulation an ally, not an enemy.
I don't think of those people that were there last night as representing really big business. I mean,
big enough.
Yeah, I mean, big is relatively.
Yeah, exactly.
Relative. But, when we've been talking with exchanges, so like Kraken and Kraken, I think is what it's called, and Trade Hill, and they're both U.S.-based exchanges based out of California, which is, of course, an insane environment to base any sort of business out of. But their whole focus, they look at Mt. Gox and they say these people have done the regulatory side wrong.
Yes.
And so now, whether or not that be true, it makes it their focus to get the regulatory side right. So when I talk with Jared from Trade Hill, his whole focus is on over-compliance, is on taking the letter of the law, then following the spirit of the law, and then going like 20% beyond that, because
in hopes that they'll leave him alone.
Exactly.
It's not that they'll leave him alone. It's that when they do attack him, and they will, he will be beyond reproach, and he'll be able to drag it out in court for decades before they can shut him down. Whereas if you go out and sign a piece of paper for Wells Fargo that says you're not a money transmission business, you then get shut down by the Department of Homeland Security and Treasury, which is what happened to Mt. Gox. I mean, this is really a matter of not even doing the basics to protect yourself, literally opening yourself up to be a victim.
Well, again, in the conversation with Eric, I brought that up because I was like, what, how can they be doing this? How can they make such basic mistakes? And his point was that, yes, there are basic mistakes, but there's such small errors, and this paper was signed 3 years ago.
Right.
At the time that it was done. So, the rules have changed.
Yes,
the regulatory environment has changed during that time. And whether or not that particular, so again, it's one of those things where if the government goes looking for reasons to mess with you, chances are pretty good they're going to find them, if just because the rules are constantly changing and you don't even know what all the rules are anyways.
Yeah, but I would also say, is it a surprise that the government is going after this? No. Is it a surprise that the rules have changed? No. And have a lot of things changed in the last 3 years? Yes. What hasn't changed? Mt. Gox didn't change their bank account in 3 years. They had 3 years to get this right. And so I do not attribute to malice what can be explained by incompetence. Right. In this particular case, it really is a matter of incompetence, technical incompetence and regulatory incompetence. Peter Vasinis covered this well. He's obviously biased because he's suing Mt. Gox at the moment.
Which was a little funny because he didn't disclose it at the time. I was like, so where's the disclosure, that you've got a thing going with them?
I don't think he really needed to disclose it, at least to the 400 people who were in that room. They were all chuckling about it. But, he made some very good points, which is that running an exchange is not about just building a trade and order matching engine. Right. You need an exchange stack, you need a regulatory stack, you need a compliance stack, you need a finance stack, you need a cash flow stack, and in fact an anti-money laundering stack and several other things. And he's absolutely right. And the question is, why would these companies go into business without having those things checked out? I can understand why you do it 3 years ago, but have you not been paying attention?
Another thing that's happened is we've seen kind of a consolidation almost, where money has started going into some of the companies that were already big. BitPay just received $2 million in venture. You didn't know this?
I did not know this. When did this happen?
Yeah, this happened 2 days ago.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, 2 days ago. And in addition to that, they hired Jeff Garzik, I believe.
Yes, he's now working for them. But interestingly enough, they're going to donate most of his time to continue to promote the core development area.
I was wondering about that.
That's what they said in the announcement. They said, he's been hired by BitPay and he will be turning all of his work into the open source. And let's be honest, I think it's important to really praise all of the early companies in Bitcoin.
Right.
Not only for the services they offer directly to customers, as bad as they are and as crashy as they are at times, we're all pioneers in this. But more importantly, almost all of the businesses in Bitcoin, the early ones, have contributed back to the community. Code, intellectual property, and various other areas of support, funding other businesses, funding developers, and then open sourcing all of that stuff. It's really important, especially at this early stage.
They did get into it because they were excited. They were just people who were excited about Bitcoin, and they said, look, I need to do something that's going to build infrastructure for this. I can see why they contributed back.
Yeah, and the word amateur is a double-edged sword. It means someone who loves the profession and does it out of love. It also means someone who's not a professional. Unfortunately, that brings a lot of enthusiasm early on, and eventually it leads to some problems of scalability and maturity.
Well, I think that's one reason that we're now seeing so many people who are saying sort of like, yeah, we need regulation. It's good. I think with this influx of VC money, they're getting a lot of pressure. You have to be professional, and part of being professional is to play the game and follow all the rules. And that means you have to, at least when you talk publicly, you have to advocate for all this regulation and stuff. I'm sure it's pressure. And another thing that came up last night was the idea of a bubble. Somebody, I forget who it was, but somebody on the panel said that they thought the biggest threat to Bitcoin right now is a bubble. And
Whoever said it, everyone agreed.
Yeah.
Including the audience. So I think that was a very salient point.
But what if we're already in a bubble? I mean, there's so much venture capital coming into Bitcoin-based companies. I mean, you went to this meetup the other day, Andreas. You talked about it on the show, maybe a week ago, but you talked about it on the show, and you said there were VCs all over this.
There were. I noticed at least 2, maybe 3 investors who were looking for stuff, and we've seen this again here at the show. The room where we had at Kickoff, you could tell. Actually, the easiest way to tell is look around and see who's wearing the pinstripe suit in a sea of blue jeans and T-shirts. And there are the VCs. And who's got a beard and a ponytail? There are the coders. Okay, I'm being a bit facetious here, but yeah, you could definitely see the bankers from a mile away, and there were plenty of them. Here's the issue: a bubble is only a bubble when it bursts.
Right.
And it's only a bubble when it can no longer sustain being inflated. Let's be real, this is a $1.6 billion incredibly useful transactional currency. The internet bubble at its height was a $1.2 trillion bubble. Can we go inflate a lot more without it bursting? Yes. What we need is less panic, I think.
Right.
Because what we saw with the 260 was a premature burst of a bubble that really has a long way to go until it is a viable economy that reflects the utility of Bitcoin.
Right.
There are fundamentals here. This is a damn useful currency. Far more fundamentals than, the pet shop site that had 700,000 eyeballs and got a valuation of $7 billion during the internet bubble.
Right. No, exactly.
There's some there.
Yeah. Well, it's about monetization, too. I mean, that was ultimately the problem with most of the internet bubble. Yeah, they had the eyeballs, but there was no monetization. Well, with Bitcoin, that's the whole thing. The whole thing is monetization.
I love the fact that Bitcoin comes pre-monetized.
Right, exactly. And that has good elements, but also bad elements. We're talking about how with Bitcoin, for the first time, if you steal something online, you no longer need to worry about how to monetize your theft. It's not like you're stealing credit card numbers and then have to sell them at pennies on the dollar. In fact, you're getting complete face value. So it's like the internet suddenly has all of these banks. Wherever there are wallet services, wherever there is value being stored, suddenly there is a bank that is screaming, rob me, rob me, rob me.
Right. And why do you rob the banks? Because that's where the money is.
Exactly.
Now, you made a very good point just now, I think, which is important to understand, which is it's not just a matter of the flexibility to transfer. It is that whenever there is theft online, the fencing component means a discount.
A huge discount. Huge.
And the more specific the item is, the more of a discount. That's why the predominant approach to protecting the crown jewels is actually misguided on the internet for corporations, because the crown jewels are the hardest to fence. Whereas your HR data and social security numbers are very easy to fence, have the lowest discount of them all. Well, now Bitcoin will be the easiest thing. Right. In fact, it's easier than digital money as held in banks or credit cards. And right now, the most defensible thing on the internet is credit card numbers. Well, Bitcoin is it. And we've seen that in also not just in terms of stealing Bitcoin, but also in terms of surreptitiously generating Bitcoin.
Right.
By sticking a mining engine in the game.
Right.
And that's the first, and I'm sure that if you look at the botnets out there, a lot of them are mining Bitcoin now. And they're huge. They're 5 to 10 million machines.
So it sort of begs the question, do we think that that's the future of mining? Do we think that, these large autonomous networks that are essentially controlled by a couple of individuals, it doesn't really matter if you're talking about a mining pool that has people voluntarily putting in and then just essentially going on autopilot, or if you're talking about ultimately these botnets. Functionally, they serve the same purpose. They're large groups of relatively low-powered computers that are pooling all of their power together so that they can achieve this goal, be it for good or for evil.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the end result. In fact, I'm looking forward to the day that both my fridge, my microwave, and my car are mining while I'm sleeping, because it follows the same pattern of evolution of the internet, where you end up with smaller and smaller and smaller devices becoming intelligent and connected. And that means intelligent, connected, and capable of mining. So yes, your light switch will be mining. Yes, your car will be mining. Tiny amounts. But it all adds up, because there's 7 billion people on the planet, but there's going to be more individual assets that are intelligent that can mine on behalf of those people. It's the ultimate decentralization, I think. So in that Google car we were talking about before that's paying fees in order to overtake the other car,
it's also mining as it's driving.
It's also mining as it's driving.
Wild.
Why not?
Yeah,
I mean, we talk about electricity generation with hybrid electric cars. Why not mining too? Pretty much anything that has computational capability can mine in its idle power. In fact, I would consider it that any device that you build, if it's not completely idle and energy saving, should immediately be switching its time to mining. Why not? That should be the energy saver version. You know, you're either doing productive work, mining, or turned off.
Yeah.
I like it.
I like that too. And I think that, again, you know, as we get further into this home automation thing, then, you know, that's totally plausible already with technology that we have now. You know, I mean, it's going to be a year or two maybe, but
the best part about that, if you do start instituting or seeing mining on that scale of distribution, then the mining naturally flows to the areas of lowest cost electricity,
right,
which also tend to be the most environmentally friendly forms of electricity.
Right.
Well, that creates an automatic flow into areas where you save energy.
That goes back to the idea, some people complain that the process of Bitcoin mining, the Bitcoin network, is quote unquote wasting energy. It is not energy efficient. Actually, no, it's performing an incredibly useful function. It's creating a payment network for the entire world.
Yes. And it's not just mining,
so
right?
important, yeah.
People think that the electricity that's spent mining is just to mint new coins, but it's not. It's also to secure all of the transactions that go into it. So
those are an auxiliary reward for doing the creation of the network.
Right? Exactly. The creation of the network is the real function. So if you wanted to compare mining to a real-world payment network, you'd have to add all of the costs of armored trucks, all of the costs of printing money all around the world, the metals that go into coins, the electricity into all the payment networks.
The opportunity is lost because you can't do transactions everywhere in the world. I mean,
fraud prevention networks, the security systems for not getting your social security card stolen, and all of the other stuff. You know, the thing is, we externalize a lot of these costs, and we hide them as part of doing business. Most of the payment networks consider anything up to 10% in fraud loss as part of doing business.
Right.
How much of that is accounted for when you're comparing to the electricity cost of mining?
Just to get back to the subject of theft for a moment, because we were talking about it recently, there was something that came up on the panel last night. They were saying that there have been a number of high-profile hacks where a lot of Bitcoins have been stolen, but haven't been moved. They were moved to some address or whatever, and then they haven't been moved.
Yes.
And somebody, I think it was from the guy from Buttercoin.
Yes, that was Bennett.
Bennett, yeah. He brought up the idea of maybe there could be, at some point, there could be like kind of a pool of Bitcoins that are quote unquote clean, you know, that have never been used for illicit purposes. And you could spend those if you wanted somebody to know that the Bitcoins you're spending are legit. And then there's this other kind of strata of Bitcoins which may have been involved in fraud or stolen or used.
And are tainted.
Yeah, and so-called tainted Bitcoins.
Yes.
The question came up of why have these Bitcoins that have been stolen in these high-profile thefts not been moved? They haven't cashed out. So is it because the crooks are afraid of getting caught by the exchanges themselves? Or is it because they're just basically holding them because they think they're going to be more valuable in the future? Nobody knows.
With this problem, I think that the solution is again, to look at banking. What do they do in bank robberies? You talk about an ink bomb, you know, where essentially cashier
lay low for a while, right?
Well, no, but what do the banks do to actually stop this?
They taint the money.
Exactly, they taint the money. And so that's the solution, is you just have a registry, because it's not like it's hard to tell if you know, a coin is stolen. Somebody reports, hey, all these coins were stolen. If they use them themselves, there's no reason to do that, because you're saying, oh, well, these coins I still have are you know, tainted, and I don't want anyone to be able to use them. So there's no incentive to do that. So long as you have that private key for the transaction before, you know, it just seems like that registry is something that's going to have to be built. And if it does, then it really disincentivizes stealing anything, because if somebody reports it, you can't use them. Of course, neither can the person who reported it, but that doesn't matter anymore.
Well, I think it's important to explain a few of the underlying concepts here for some of the listeners who don't necessarily understand how this works. But the blockchain doesn't hold Bitcoin. It holds the transactions that exchange Bitcoin. And we talk about Bitcoin being pseudonymous, or a pseudonymous network. And essentially, the individuals who attach to addresses are difficult to track because you don't know who has which address and how many addresses they have. Great. That doesn't mean the Bitcoins themselves are pseudonymous or untrackable. In fact, the exact opposite. The Bitcoins that traverse through the network are trackable from the moment of genesis all the way until they're spent and respent and forever. Every single Bitcoin has a unique moment of genesis, a serial number, and it follows the transactions all the way through. Not the Bitcoin itself, but as it's moved from transaction to transaction, you can essentially create this trail that leads back to the origin.
That's why, wasn't there somebody a while back who was trying to collect all the Bitcoins from like the first 50 blocks or something like that?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, and you can. Now, the Bitcoins themselves
if you could find them. Yeah. I bet a lot of those are in like, oh, I lost my password after I encrypted my wallet. They're gone forever.
We can track Bitcoin from generation throughout. And so the idea here is that as soon as you have a registry, you could essentially declare Bitcoin as stolen. And here's the thing. You don't need everyone to stop accepting that Bitcoin. To Adam's point earlier, the big appeal of Bitcoin is that the discount rate on fencing is low. Well, as soon as you take 80% of the markets and they agree to stop accepting that Bitcoin, immediately the discount on fencing will go through the roof. Suddenly, your Bitcoin are only worth 20% of face value if they're tainted, because you can only spend them, say, on, I don't know, Silk Road or...
places where, it doesn't matter that they're stolen. Yeah, just markets that would have accepted them anyway.
Completely illicit things like buying banking stock. Or drugs or something really ridiculously illegal like that.
I guess it's sort of the same thing for cash, right? There are some places that are going to accept cash from anywhere, no questions asked. Other places, if you walk in with a lot of cash, they may have some questions. They may want to verify your ID, get some details on you, or whatever.
And if you walk in with cash covered with blue ink, then...
Yes, exactly. If it's purple fluorescent cash, and it looks like it's been through a couple of washes cycles, it's not going to be easy to give that to anyone.
Yeah.
So that function would work very well for Bitcoin, and it was another one of those great insights that evening.
So do we think that there's a potential for that to be used for evil? Because I mean, you talk about registries for Bitcoin, and suddenly you're into this whole thing where you've got centralized registries. I mean, ultimately, it could just be a new type of transaction that's made essentially on behalf of the coins at the time that they're stolen.
So it's a consensus network. So as with the internet, it's a double-edged sword. The internet could be the greatest liberator in the world or the worst totalitarian dystopia we've ever experienced. Bitcoin could also do both of those things. It's a neutral currency and could be manipulated. Here's what I think would happen. If you did have trackability of Bitcoin on that scale, people would really, really invest in Bitcoin remixers. And if those remixers didn't take tainted coins, then as long as you had clean coins, you could remix them into anonymity very easily.
Right.
But you would not be able to mix your tainted coins. And again, it's just a matter of getting a suitable number of remixers to do that. Right. And you lose the face value of the Bitcoin that's stolen.
Those exist already, by the way. Have you guys ever seen sites like Bitcoin Laundry, and I think there's one called Zero Coin?
But they accept any coin, not... so if they stop taking tainted coins, they could essentially achieve the purpose of preventing stolen money being recirculated while still allowing, avoiding essentially surveillance or mass surveillance of the form where every Bitcoin is tracked. And by the way, if you don't think that that's already happening, since I can do it at home with my PC on the 8 gigabyte blockchain, I can tell you that every single Bitcoin that's ever spent and every transaction is cross-correlated and tracked in great detail somewhere in a big data center in Utah by the National Storage Agency.
One of the people at the meetup that we just got finished with before coming to do this recording, talking with him, he's a derivatives market maker, essentially. That's what he was saying, is that, if he was in the CIA, this would absolutely be the thing that he would track. Because right now, if you want to look at every single transaction that happens in a given currency, you need all kinds of court orders, and it's basically impossible.
You don't need any court orders anymore, not since the Patriot Act. You can look into banking records without any court order whatsoever.
That is true.
But this is much more trackable. Right. It's definitely the low-hanging fruit.
It's very transparent. Yes. So, that transparency goes both ways.
Yeah, look, the Utah Data Center has 1 trillion terabytes of storage.
Okay.
and that's been verified by a couple of independent whistleblowers. Don't worry, every single email, every single website, every single phone call, every single Bitcoin is on there.
Yeah, but I mean, to a certain extent,
Who cares?
Yeah.
Right. What are they going to do about it?
Right.
Well, what are they going to do about it? Exactly. That's the issue. And for me, I like to keep a very public address for my Bitcoin and use it to do very above board tracking.
Right.
You see, that's the flip side of this, and we talked about this in the context of non-for-profits, is that by having a public ledger, you also can generate accountability. So, eventually government co-opts this and they start using Bitcoin, and guess what? We can track them too.
Right.
The counterpart to surveillance is surveillance, a French word that means watching from below. We are getting closer and closer to a surveillance society, just as they're getting closer and closer to a surveillance society. Who watches the watchers? The watched.
Everybody.
Exactly. And then you can have some consensus about really what is an unacceptable and evil transaction.
Right.
I would say purchasing bombs for dropping on brown people overseas is an unacceptable use of Bitcoin.
Yes, and I think a lot of people would agree
and
with
US
you.
dollars.
Right, exactly.
Let's Talk Bitcoin has some exciting things coming up on the horizon, but we can't share details with you just yet. To all the listeners, new and old, thank you very much for helping prove that real journalism still has a place in this crazy world we inhabit. Your emails, donations, help, and support have led to where we are now, on the verge of something very powerful. Of course, the show is nothing without an audience, and while we appreciate your donations very much, the most important thing is to share the show with friends and family who should, but aren't, be educating themselves on the future of money. If you're new to Bitcoin and would like to learn more, please visit letstalkbitcoin.com/learn to be directed to the Bitcoin Education Project, a free series of lectures and classes about many aspects of Bitcoin and the surrounding topics, created and curated by Charles Hoskinson. I highly recommend this educational resource. We're also actively recruiting both on and off-air talent for this and other shows. If you're interested, please contact Adam at letstalkbitcoin.com.
So one of the concepts that we've been kicking around is the idea of like peg coin, where you
Peg to dollar?
Yeah, peg to dollar. You can't call it dollar coin. I know, but I want to.
Let's talk about it because I can tell you exactly how that's going to get screwed beyond belief.
Great. Okay.
Yes.
So here's the pitch. The pitch is that the problem with Bitcoin is that it's difficult to move into and out of from cryptocurrency to legacy currency. So what if you created an altcoin chain that instead of trying to fix something about Bitcoin, instead broke all the things that Bitcoin fixes and essentially pegs itself to the same issuance as US dollar? So that means that you could have, so it does a couple of things. One, it means that vendors can accept it without having to change their prices because functionally it's a one-to-one comparison. It also means
Payments can be sent anywhere.
Yeah, payments can be sent anywhere. And so it gives that sort of relative, air quotes, stability to...
And it's irreversible.
And it's irreversible, so you still have a lot of those things. And most importantly, you can play between the two currencies. You can easily move because it's very easy. If you want to buy Litecoins with Bitcoins, that's a super duper easy transaction. Doesn't require any sort of FinCEN regulations, doesn't require any sort of disclosures. It's just, crypto to crypto. So why not make a functionally dollar crypto? You can't call it that because anything you call a dollar immediately attracts the ire of the Secret Service. But if you had like a peg coin that was attached to that, then you could play it both ways. If you are uncomfortable with the volatility in the market, you move to the peg, and you're potentially losing out or gaining depending on what's happening.
Well, a couple of thoughts about that. One, a peg really requires a central authority to enforce it.
But there's already one. There's already a central authority.
The
Federal Reserve. So you just peg it to their monthly reports, or you peg it to one.
But how are you going to make sure that? Okay, so basically,
this has been done before. Let's look at the history lesson before we try to figure out whether it's possible or not. Let's look at exactly how this scenario played out, because it's played out several times in the last several years. Sweden tried to do it, Argentina tried to do it, and at some point, the British pound sterling tried to do it in terms of keeping their relative volatility against the US dollar stable. And what happened? The famous phrase that comes from a hedge fund, I don't remember who it was, whether it was George Soros or Warren Buffett or somebody like that, who said, last person out, turn off the lights, because they arbitrage that national currency into death. Mm-hmm. If you try to peg a smaller economy to a bigger economy, the volatility will whiplash the smaller economy to shreds. Every single shift in volatility becomes an opportunity for arbitrage, and the stronger you try to peg it, the more money you have to put in on the buy side in order to stop the sell side people from unpegging it. And what happens is essentially you create this beautiful market of free money because you're trying to evade reality. And the reality is that the $12 trillion economy that's the US won't budge because it's $12 trillion large, and you're trying not to budge, but you don't have the $12 trillion behind you. And guess what? Someone's going to make a lot of money on that. Mm-hmm. And it's happened again and again and again. Anytime someone's tried to peg a currency to any currency or any standard, in fact, the gold fiasco of an inability to grow beyond the gold standard was an attempt to peg all the currencies to something stable and ignore the fact that they had inherent volatility. And what happens? You arbitrage the hell between gold and currencies, or you arbitrage the hell between dollars and pegs.
Right, but
so you can do it, and it will fail miserably.
But let me challenge you on that, because yeah, you're right with other currencies where you have that sort of latency, but with a cryptocurrency, again, it's just all about the algorithm. So you build it so that it just keeps up. I mean, isn't that the thing?
Yeah, you could do that, but there'd still be a discrepancy between that and other cryptocurrencies.
So it's the size.
Here's the problem. You could trade from that peg currency into any other cryptocurrency instantly, but you could not trade from that peg currency into dollars instantly. And that would create a massive imbalance that would give you arbitrage opportunity of peg coin against Bitcoin. And you'd make a ton of Bitcoin shorting peg coin. And sure, it would remain pegged until nobody's trading it because they no longer believe that that pegged value is actually what people will pay for it.
But isn't this whole thing could be kind of irrelevant, because there have been people before who have talked about using Bitcoin's properties as a payment network independent of the exchange rate between Bitcoins and dollars. So it's a way to send and receive payments. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily a commodity, and sort of decoupling those two things. Mm-hmm. And that works if you can get between Bitcoins and dollars fast enough.
You have to get in and out fast enough. Not
exactly.
Just in, but in and out fast enough. Yeah.
Right. And, I think BitPay does a decent job with that. If there were a lot more people who wanted to use that service in that way, perhaps it may overload it, but then there'd be more opportunities for other people to just fill the same niche. So, perhaps just Bitcoin, we don't need a pegged coin. We can just use Bitcoin itself for that purpose.
I think the volatility problems of Bitcoin are twofold. One is the lack of sufficient volume and liquidity in the market to just buffer volatility. If you have a Titanic-sized economy, it doesn't turn on a dime, and that's a bad thing, but it's also a good thing because it provides stability. The other reason is because of the deflationary nature. People go in these cycles of hoard, panic, and that creates volatility. We can solve the first one by adding more liquidity and volume. We're not sure, at least I'm not sure, that we can solve the second one yet. And, that may lead to altcoins doing a bit better if they can solve the deflationary issue a bit better. But as long as there's friction between fiat and cryptocurrencies, that friction will generate volatility. And if you try to pretend that doesn't exist, you're going to pay for that. And someone's going to make a lot of money making you pay for that.
The first speaker last night was the CEO of Expensify. I can't remember his name. Do you guys remember?
David.
Yeah, David.
I can't recall his last name.
Okay, yeah, well, maybe we'll find out later. But he was saying, he was kind of introducing the whole panel thing. And he said, there are a bunch of characters involved in Bitcoin. First, there's these, crypto anarchists who kind of want to liberate the world. And then there's these idealists. And then there's the currency speculators. And we put them last of all. They're the worst of anybody. Everybody hates them most. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. Currency speculators, at least in the naked currency speculation and the institutionalized version of that, are necessary. They're absolutely necessary. And but unfortunately, no one likes the animal that picks on the corpses of other animals. Right. So we don't like vultures and we don't like hyenas. As necessary as they are, we don't like maggots. Yeah, they're maggots. They're necessary, but they're still maggots.
Right.
Well, we had a meetup at Gordon Biersch today at noon, and it was supposed to go noon to 2, and we showed up, Crystal and I and my wife, showed up wondering if anybody was going to be there. We had gotten about 20 RSVPs, and it was really a lot of fun.
It rocked. I mean, I had so much fun. I talked to almost everybody there.
Yeah, me too.
There were a couple people I wanted to talk to, but I didn't quite catch them. The conversations were fascinating. Just discovered I had a lot in common with people who came there. Got so many compliments on the show. I guess those are the people who like our show because they would come to meet up with us. But it felt great, to know that people were listening and that they wanted to hang out with us. I had a lot of fun.
Absolutely. I mean, beyond that, for me, the thing was that, I like to surround myself with people who are smarter than I am. And my God, I mean, the conversations that you're able to have at something like this, it's great. The level that we're talking at is something, like I have to go on the internet to get this. So, it was a lot of fun.
And much faster. You get the feedback right away, and absolutely, as you said, you don't want to be the smartest person in the room. And being smart is also a bit of a vector, right? So even if the other person was as smart, they were smart at a different angle.
Right, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so that really created some tremendous opportunities for getting new ideas in a completely different field from the one you're thinking about.
Right.
I have to tell you guys, the first Let's Talk Bitcoin meetup we did today was about a quarter of the size of the meetup I went to a couple of weeks ago. I think you now know why I'm so excited about these things. And so what I hope is that this is not just the first of Let's Talk Bitcoin meetups, but the first of many. And let's keep doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We're going to have to transition that group from a San Jose 2013 group just to a kind of a generic group that can be wherever.
Yep. I'm going to be organizing some more San Jose meetups as well, though, in the next few weeks.
Cool. I'll have to fly in from New Hampshire. Get my private jet.
Yeah.
Vroom,
vroom. Vroom, vroom. All right. Well, we have a speaker's dinner in about 6 minutes, it looks like. So we're going to wrap it up. Once again, thanks for tuning into this special episode of Let's Talk Bitcoin.
Yeah, we'll have more recording from the conference, too.
Oh, my God. Yeah, you've been recording everybody at the meetup. You did 2 or 3 interviews. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know you have been too, Adam, so we'll be giving you the content.
Yeah, there's no shortage of content to be had here. Great. Well, until next time, I am Adam.
I'm Stephanie.
I'm Andreas.
This is Let's Talk Bitcoin.
Woohoo!
Thanks for tuning in to episode 9 of Let's Talk Bitcoin. Whether you liked, loved, or hated the show, we want to hear what you think. Please send all listener feedback, comments, or questions to adam@letstalkbitcoin.com. If you're like me and just can't get enough information and perspective on Bitcoin, check out our daily newspaper at thedailybitcoin.com, where you'll find the best news presenting articles and arguments from all sides of the issue. Thanks to Andreas M. Antonopoulos and Dr. Stephanie Murphy for providing content for this show. Music for this episode was provided by Jared Rubens. You can find links to the songs we use and the open source artists who make them at letstalkbitcoin.com/music. Check back tomorrow for the first of many bonus content releases. We're kicking things off with my interview with Eric Voorhees, the man who gave himself to Bitcoin and moved to Panama to facilitate that goal. We talk the future, the past, and more. I really enjoyed our talk, and I think you will too. Stay tuned.